If I'm the Minnesota Vikings and I have 2 first-round selections, I'm feeling pretty good about my chances to hit some home runs on day 1 of the NFL draft. With picks at 22 and again at 25, General Manager Rick Spielman can address a handful of needs at cornerback, wide receiver, defensive end, even offensive tackle. Spielman could also use one of those picks on one of the aforementioned positions and then the other to trade back and earn more draft capital to address a different position on a different day. Let's start out with that first scenario. In my opinion, the most pressing need for the Vikings right now is at cornerback, given they lost Xavier Rhodes, Trey Waynes, and Mackenzie Alexander in free agency, and the secondary is going to feature a host of new starters at the cornerback position in 2020. What I like about this cornerback class, especially the first rounders, is many of them possess the physical tools needed to play the position in Mike Zimmer's defense. I'm most intrigued by players like Christian Fulton, Trayvon Diggs, Jalen Johnson, Jeff Gladney, all of whom might be available to the Vikings if they looked at a cornerback at 22. What's most important is Minnesota needs to bring in a cornerback to compete as a day 1 starter for one of the outside spots so they can shore up that position and continue to fix their pass defense. Now, you'll remember, the Vikings lost more than a handful of starters on the defensive side of the ball in free agency, which is why at 25, I would like to draft Iowa's A.J. Epinesa. He brings many of the similar traits that you saw with Everson Griffin over his career with the Vikings. Violent, explosive, off the edge, plays with tremendous power, and the reason he might be available later in the first round is because he didn't have a great combine, but obviously we know those numbers are subjective. So going defense at 22 and defense at 25 are certainly viable options for the Minnesota Vikings in the first round. But they may also want to try to find a player to bring in to replace all that they lose with Stephon Diggs. There are a handful of wide receivers I think would be a good fit for the Vikings if they chose them at 22 or 25. They might not be able to pass up on someone like Justin Jefferson, T. Higgins, Denzel Mims. But given how deep this wide receiver class is, I'll go back to that second scenario I brought up, where Rick Spielman uses one of his first-round picks, potentially on a defensive end or a cornerback, like I explained, and then the other one, let's say for the sake of this argument, it's the 25th overall pick, to trade with another team and then earn draft capital they could use on day 2 or day 3. This is a deep receiver class. There are receivers that could come in and compete for that number 2 job opposite Adam Thielen, along with Tajay Sharp, who the Vikings brought in free agency, that Minnesota could find really good value for on day 2 or day 3.